Welcome to the Marshall Pruitt Podcast, your week in IndyCar listener Q&A, heading into good old Portland International Raceway here in a few days, coming off of a little Motorsports Jamboree, Worldwide Technology Raceway, a.k.a. Gateway near Saint Louis, a little French town. No, wait. Hey, really do appreciate you and all the questions you send in. And our good friend Jerry Josef, who compiles them, presents them, and does everything he can to make the show entertaining. So why don't we speak right on the other side of this? Time to say a big thank you to our show partners on the Marshall Pruitt Podcast, starting with Pfaff Technologies, build-to-print composites manufacturing company. They're specializing in medium to large-scale automotive, motorsports, and military applications. Visit PfaffTechnologies.com. It's P-F-A-F-F Technologies.com to learn more about their services and how they can benefit your business. Next, it's the Justice Brothers, makers of premium additives, lubricants, and cleaners, been servicing the automotive and motorsports industries for more than 85 years, with victories in all the biggest North American motor races, including the Indianapolis 500, the 24 Hours of Daytona. The Justice Brothers products are truly race-proven. Learn about their vast history and range of offerings at justicebrothers.com. If you're fond of awesome motor racing collectibles, including Pfaff Motorsports McLaren gear and goodies, pay a visit to torontomotorsports.com. And finally, we have a new online merchandise home for the podcast, thepruittstore.com, where all the show stickers, models, racing memorabilia I'm trying to sell and put towards our fund to buy a house is now live and rocking. thepruittstore.com. Got a lot to dive into here, so why don't we waste no time and do that. Opening the show with our friend Jamie Carr says, not sure if you can answer, but I'll ask anyways. After Will Power's crash, I was watching the video of him with his team. There wasn't audio, so I was lip reading. Why would Will be focused on dinner? He kept talking about Fuddruckers, and I checked, and there aren't any Fuddruckers restaurants nearby there. Spent a good while on the phone with DJ Willie P today, and indeed, oh boy, yeah, this was a nuclear meltdown that went on for a little while, and crossed multiple lanes. So, thing I love about Will, he is authentic, genuine, 1,000,000% himself. He could, I am sure, censor himself and be demure and all those things that so many other professional athletes force themselves to be. Thankfully, he does not. Also comes with a few Fuddruckers and I guess the parent of that restaurant, Mother Fuddruckers, and all kinds of things. But I genuinely appreciate that. How's this? After Will Power in IndyCar, name another driver who would go full bore using all the words, right? There's really not many. Maybe Scott McLaughlin. I think Romain Grosjean, probably. Some of those might be in French, but just saying. Will, among the 27 drivers, gotten to a place where he's a bit of a unicorn. There aren't many who would let it all go like that, and I appreciate it, and I will truly miss it when it's gone. A little bit of a issue, if you wanted to put it that way, with his view on what happened with David Malukas, and cursed at him. I know the presentation of it during the broadcast, and I think just kind of ran with it afterwards, gave him the impression that Will went up to David and screamed at him. Speaking with Will today, again, I don't know, probably on the phone for half hour, 40 minutes, talking about a lot of things, most of them not racing, but he said he was riding by in a golf cart and barked at him and did use a non-savory word or two in there, but it was a flyby compared to a going straight up and accosting him face to face and call it a hostile interpersonal interreaction. it was a flyby in a golf cart and some shouty words. So I view that as a bit different. Maybe characterize that as not so much of a face-to-face type thing. But there was no doubt, if you watched the replay one time, that this was Will's fault. And where things went sideways is Will couldn't see it, didn't understand it, and was really mad at David and let him know. And then he saw the replay and realized he was at fault. And so according to David, who I spoke with today as well, Will found him and or apologized to him in person and then called the next day and really apologized. And the two of them are back on good terms. David looks up to Will. Like they're, as drivers go, you could say they're friends or friendly. I know that Will's unfounded admonishment, we're using some long words here, it hit David in a hard way. And I was really glad to hear from both Will and David that made amends, patched things up. Will acknowledged it was his fault, turned down on him. Everything we saw and knew, he eventually saw and knew, and did what you would hope of your veterans, right? Corrected himself, admitted he was at fault, apologized for it. I appreciate that, genuinely appreciate that. So while Will might not have been behaving on the good old TV like a role model so much, do appreciate the fact that he's behaving like a role model as he should among the drivers afterwards when he knew, hey, that was my bad. Totally went the wrong direction on this. With the Newgarden restart and some other things going on here, we got some questions related to that. So I will wait for those questions specific to that, but Will also told me, I called him yesterday, Monday, and he answered quickly and said, hey man, I'm on a boat. Can I call you later or call you tomorrow? I'm like, yeah, talk tomorrow, man. No big deal. And so spoke today and he was like, yeah, sorry, I was on a boat with Newgarden. I think they live on in and around the same lake, and we're wake surfing, according to Will, and just chilling. Spent the afternoon together. So what seemed like fist fights galore, WWE SummerSlam coming to Portland this weekend, indeed not at all. Power and Lil Dave, good place. Power and Newgarden, good place. Happy that is where it's at. Let's move on to Andrew Staley. He says, are we getting a Willpower single bird trading card now? All my best to you, your wife, and the kitties. Yeah, we got the double bird. Do we need a single and maybe a triple? And we just won't even explore how he would do a triple bird, but I feel like you've exposed a weakness in my game here, Andrew, because I'm only prepared for double birds. So, yeah, my bad there. Ken Anderson says, kudos to IndyCar for bringing a better package to Gateway than Iowa. However, if it weren't for the long yellows and the red track cleaning, we would have seen a similar race as to Iowa. It's just I'm hoping that Saturday was a sign that things are getting sorted out and the series is progressing through the hybrid growing pains. Yeah, I mean, I still need to dig into this one factor, Ken. It's just gotten home and been in Montreal last week. I'm still trying to play catch up a little bit, but as it was told to me, coming out of the Gateway test, which took place, whatever it was, a week before the race, 10 days before the race, different tire was brought and tried, better than the previous one, which was characterized as really not good for matching the track surface there. I was told, but need to verify, that there might have been a slight adjustment to the final tire that ended up being used during the race weekend itself. Whether that's accurate or not, I can tell you the consensus coming out of that final test, speaking to drivers, speaking to race engineers, was is going to be another Iowa. This might be worse than Iowa. Single groove, single everything, not going to be able to pass. That's what they found in the test. Of the factors to consider, that test hotter for sure. Race was run in cooler conditions. Could that have helped? Very likely. Would also say everybody praised IndyCar going to a higher downforce package, so that seemed to definitely help add grip, help add traction. You look at the timing of cautions, and for sure, there's a huge benefit here. And this is a factor that you can't really factor in before the race, but the race itself got going, and lap 8, we had a caution. And right after, we had another caution, I think lap 16 or 17. Right off the bat, we had opportunities for serious strategery, serious options to do something different. And that is where, on ovals in particular, short ovals really is where this stands out as thank you. It's perfect. Half the field is really angry after qualifying. The other half is somewhat decently minded as to how things went. But those in the bottom half are absolutely looking to dive onto an alternate strategy as soon as it presents itself. When we do not have any kind of early caution, or the first half of the race at least is pretty straightforward, you kill the option for mass alternate strategy attempts, and you end up getting a bunch of cars that are more or less running similar, if not downright the same speeds, and you get a really boring race. Cannot overlook the fact that thankfully for those 2 early cautions, had that opportunity. Had another caution, lap 85, lap 86, through another option for even more alternate strategery. So we get to not even the halfway point of the race, Ken, and all of a sudden there's legitimately like 3 different strategies going on. That's what makes for great oval racing. It's the different ideas. Those who are on fresher tires, those who are on older tires. It's the risers and fallers scenario, as I refer to it, where cool, hey, Stingray Rob, you're a rocket. Career best finish, I think. Very much a strategy thing. Obviously, his car was handling well. Can't discount that, but just saying, in a normal world, if he was having to spend most of the race on the same strategy as everybody else, we're not even mentioning his name, realistically, he has a finish that's not even worth talking about. So that's a big factor. Tires seem to be something that worked better than anybody anticipated. Throw in those cautions. Downforce level was nailed. There's a lot of things that worked here. If we were to go back and do this race tomorrow night, and again, there were no cautions for the first good while, we would very likely be talking about a race that was by no means as entertaining. So if there's one thing that I thought of coming out of this race, having been so thankful, it gave you lots. There were very few stretches I would consider to be boring. It's how do you introduce variables into a race if they're not happening naturally? Is that a competition caution? And I realize that's a thing that might make some go, come on, I don't want to hear this kind of manufactured stuff. I hear you, but I also hear you even louder when we have a snoozer of an oval race in particular. Sometimes we'll have those on road courses too, but if we're looking for something where you go, hey, what are we in? We are in sport, but we're also looking to entertain. We sell tickets. They sell tickets. Looking to get folks to watch, looking to get folks to attend. There are things you can do that spice up the show on a more frequent basis. That's actually what most sporting leagues do. We're coming into a new NFL season where, yet again, they've looked at the rules and said, what might we adjust to make the show better, make the show more entertaining? It happens in most series, most leagues. Might not be a bad thing to ask these questions about ovals. And if there aren't any natural cautions that occur early, what options are there that IndyCar might be willing to consider to introduce some of the variables that almost always guarantee we have a good oval race? Pal Jeremiah Morrill, looking forward to seeing you and your amazing wife, Sarah, who has a birthday coming up here in Milwaukee. Jeremiah says, Gateway was among the best non-Indy 500 oval races in a decade. When the series translate the ability to pass and have multiple lanes to Milwaukee and Nashville, so it's almost lost hope. We'll get a decent oval package this year. Got another question, too, which I'll get to in a moment. There's less hope for Milwaukee. Didn't particularly see a second lane develop there, the hybrid test. I'm sure that there will be work put in by the series with a high lane session and efforts to grip up a second lane. But, I mean, that was also something that worked quite well at Gateway, obviously. So I should have mentioned that as well. But less hopeful about Milwaukee. Nashville, I got to ask some more questions here. I don't have enough info there, but I know that the drivers and engineers and strategists and everybody, they all want to help IndyCar to get things right. So don't have the answer yet, but I am enthused by the fact that the paddock wants to play a much bigger role here, Jeremiah, to help IndyCar hit more home runs and ovals. You said also Josef Newgarden has turned full heel. Rossi and Power absolutely should have beef with him. Yeah, I haven't seen Josef turn. I think he's been where he's at for a little while now. I just think he's totally comfortable with it, which I guess maybe it's an important part of any heel, right? We're using wrestling terms, by the way. They can either act like a heel and do things to anger and whatnot, get really under folks' skin and just be antagonists. Then there's also the just owning it. There's a smugness, which is also another tact taken by heels. That might be what I see. And I gotta admit, I like that more than just the obvious bombastic heel doing the kind of predictable things to stoke the flames and needle people. I kind of like the do something about it kind of approach. Yeah, that's right. I'm gonna give you a smile. You bet. I'm that man. I like that a little bit more than the chest pounding and all that kind of stuff. So as for Rossi and Power having beef with him, we're going to get into some of that right here. Starting with our friend Zach Dean, possibly the smartest person listening to any podcast, let alone this one. Okay, what in the actual heck are the restart rules? Josef says it's the leader who starts the field and the flag man follows. The broadcast says it's the flag man. What is life? Help, he says. We even got 3 exclamation points on the help. Okay, and there are a couple of following questions here, so I'll go from item to item. So, indeed, the leader of the race is meant to lead the restart process. As I learned in speaking with the IndyCar series by the good old telephone Monday morning, I wasn't aware of this. It's just my ignorance. Maybe everybody else knew, but me. Race control has a practice policy. I don't know. Maybe it's written down somewhere In the restart zone, you'd expect the leader to accelerate at some point in time, and their acceleration is what then triggers the waving of the green flag and race control in flipping of the proverbial switch to go green. Light up all the EM marshalling panels in green. So driver acts, others in charge of officiating react and react swiftly. Have a scenario that happened on this final restart where in that restart zone, the leader didn't go. Got to the end of the restart zone. And IndyCar, which I learned, has a practice where they say, okay, we're going to throw the green. So you didn't do the thing, which would lead us to do it, call it naturally, forced our hand by not going yet. And so this is the part I'm not a fan of. Instead of waving it off and saying, hey, they decide to go green, quote, without the leader, meaning, hey, buddy, sorry, you got to the end of the zone. We decided to go green because you didn't. Everybody go race. And if that disadvantages you, well, get back the throttle, start accelerating like normal a little bit earlier, and no issues. What seemed to me to be a bit of a rarity is I just can't remember this leader waiting until the last millisecond, last inch of road. I'm exaggerating, but again, it was very clear that this was a much later restart than we'd seen throughout the race or any ovals, frankly. And again, I'm not saying it's never happened before. I'm just saying it happens so infrequently that I can't really remember the last time it happened. But restarts prior to this had happened somewhere in the turn, between turn 3 and turn 4. This happened on the front straight. Again, just much later than anyone was expecting. And so, because this was an anomaly, this is where I would have thought IndyCar say, waving it off, come around again, get on the radio to Newgarden and or his team and say, hey, go like we expect you to go. Okay, let's not do anything weird. Granted, the flip side to this, which I think would have been the most advantageous for the entire field, not necessarily the leader, would be if the leader got to the very start of the restart zone and took off. Leader does not want to give those behind them any more time to accelerate and potentially catch them going into turn 1, or to get a set up for a better run out of turn 2 than necessary. Totally get that. Want to make sure you got the element of surprise. You can streak away before anyone behind you. You don't want to give them a long runway to try and build up speed momentum in the draft. Totally get that. So the friendly way, the minute you get into the zone, off you go. The harder way is waiting until the last possible moment. This is what happened here. IndyCar chose to flip switches and wave greens. We had what we had. I'd love for them to reconsider that and say, okay, we've seen what can happen here. This kind of pack up and running into each other doesn't usually happen when you go early in the zone or halfway through or even a little bit past halfway. That's where we tend to see these things initiate. We just don't have a lot of folks running into each other when that happens. Here, this is when this tends to happen. So, don't throw the green. Realize it's the leader's option to go whenever they want. It's also the series' option to say, hey, we want you to do this, not that. give everybody a chance to reset, call for a more normal restart, and off we go. Other thing I'll just add here, which is overarching, talking about Josef Newgarden restarting the race, right? Not Rookie X, who's wetting their driver's suit because they've never done this with 8 laps to go on an oval, and there's a bunch of raging monsters behind them, and we're talking about arguably, maybe not even any argument there, the best oval driver / short oval driver in IndyCar, leading the race, right? If there's anyone who, in the last 8 laps of a oval race, I think might win the thing, provided they're in the top 3, top 4, it's Josef Nikolai Newgarden. Realize his teammate Scott McLaughlin's become pretty damn fierce on ovals as well. It's directly behind him. Colton Herta chasing his first oval win right behind him. Will Power in 4th, right? I mean, there's some beasts behind them. No, we're also talking about some folks who are lap down or otherwise. Regardless, I get the mindset of not wanting to go early and make it easy on anyone pursuing him. But at the same time, I don't know if I lump Josef Newgarden into the category of someone who needs to do anything other than a normal restart, especially at a shorter oval like this, where no matter what momentum your pursuers get going into turn 1, there's a pretty decent slowdown in turn 1, turn 2, and it's not like the Indy 500. It's not like the Speedway where, oh boy, that momentum's going to get carried basically unchecked, no hindrance at all, and you're going to be just a sitting duck by turn 3. Gateway's turn 1 and turn 2, not like that. Tighter, got to give up more momentum. Just saying. Would have totally understood if a much lesser driver decided to try and wait to the last second, get the greatest advantage on that restart. I look at this guy and go, I have no doubt you're going to win this race, because that's the kind of thing you do. So that's why I sure wish IndyCar would look at any future instances like this and say, ooh, are you getting a little uncomfortable how late this is going? Aaron Likens, we'd love for you to wave those double yellows, and we're going to tell everyone we're going to try this again, and hey, leader, behave normally. Mark Graham says, given this past weekend's restart issues after yellow flags, do non-lead car drivers rely on green flag lights, leading cars acceleration, race control's green call, their spotter's call to begin their acceleration? Yes. All the above. Depends where you are. Depends on your preference, team's preference. Spotters will certainly call green, green, green. The same time, think of restarts, if you're a fan or familiar with drag racing at all, of sitting there staring at the Christmas tree. As the lights change from red to yellow to green, green means go. If you are sitting there waiting for the green light to come on and recognize, hey, there's the green light, and then think, I should step on the throttle. I realize release the trans brake, but if you're waiting to see the green to go, you're going to get left behind or run over. So this is where you get a variety of things happening. I know you're asking for the non-lead pack, but if you're sitting 10th, 15th, whatever, you are very likely, knowing that we're coming around a long arc of a corner, coming out of turn 4, you're looking ahead to the leader or the lead cars to see them move. And if they're moving, you're getting into the throttle. IndyCar does have the rule where you can't pass, can't really break out a line until the green flag / green lights come on. So at that point, all you can do is move forward instead of left or right until you see the lights come on. But without a doubt, each driver is looking at the driver ahead of them to see if they move. Also trying to keep an eye up front as you're getting into that restart zone as to when the lead pack is moving. So, yeah. And again, you're getting the spotter yelling green, 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 but that is when they see the green either being waved or the light come on. But more than anything, if the pack starts moving, regardless of whether a green is out, drivers are moving, because if you're waiting to see the green or hear someone tell you it's green, you're going to get left behind. Eric Franklin says, that scene really seemed like an Uncle Bobby. Talk about Uncle Bob. Eric Franklin says, that really seemed like an Uncle Bobby answer. Saturday night feature restart by Josef. Do you think it was fair play or dirty pool? I think in the moment, Eric, it was presented like dirty pool. Been an interesting dynamic on the broadcasts this year, I think more than ever, where there's a lot of ginning up of folks that happens. And I looked at this incident as a perfect example of that. And it's happened multiple times this year where something gets said or a firm opinion is expressed on the broadcast, and all of a sudden there's a dozen letters or more to the Racer Mailbag, or tons of them into this Q&A show, all building on whatever was said during the broadcast as fact. And that isn't always the case. And that's not a criticism of my friends calling the races, just saying that just because somebody on the broadcast says this is the way it is, doesn't mean it's the way it is. This Newgarden scenario perfectly fits that example. So, was packing up in Monterey on Saturday night in the media center, trying to download footage and whatever from my camera and cards and yada, yada, yada. And also trying to watch the race via Peacock. And so watching, listening, etc. And keep in mind, I'm not exactly sitting there at the track watching it live, nor am I sitting home, large TV, everything else kind of just no distractions. There's a lot of distractions for me Saturday night. So doing my best, and something happens. And okay, hey, oh boy, all right, that's bad. Rossi, geez, up in the air, and what's going on? And we start getting into the replays of it. And Hinch and Townsend, who I love individually, but they're constant back and forth. Some of it not always, a lot of it not always very polite. Gets confusing sometimes, right? So have some opinions that are right, some that are wrong, then opinions change, then things go in another direction, and we've kind of hit the, if this was a Scantron test, it would be A, B, C, D, and E, everything, all the above. Like every possible who was at fault, who wasn't at fault was presented and often changed. Blame went here, there, more on this person, less on that. No, okay, less over on that, more. Item, for example, presented during the broadcast. I fully went with it, thought that I saw the same exact thing, fully agreed. Flames out of Josef's exhausts just prior to the start. Evidence of lifting. Could hear a little tiny, seemingly wavering in the exhaust note. Any mild crack of the throttle in that scenario would indeed send small belches of flame out of the heads, out through the exhausts, and was mentioned during the broadcast upon the multiple reviews. Looking rearward from Josef's overhead camera, you could see flames from the exhaust, evidence of him lifting and kind of playing games. Took that as fact, saw it myself, accepted it. Josef's dirty pool. Get home Monday. Okay, let's go back, and I must have watched that specific sequence 12 times at least. I think I've done it a few more times since then. I think I'm now up to 15. There were no flames out of his exhaust. What it was reflections, overhead lights, reflections on the front upper wishbone legs, right behind the exhaust, super crazy high heat. So what teams do is they put stainless steel, they wrap that portion of the suspension wishbone, stainless steel, could be Inconel, but they place a heat shield over the suspension A-arm to prevent it from getting burned up, warped, problems caused, etc., since it's directly right behind and in the path of all those hot exhaust gases. Well, I mistook, I'm guessing possibly during the broadcast it was mistaken as well, but the overhead lights on the track were reflecting on those metal heat shields. Mistook that for flames. I got to thank Team Penske president Tim Cindric for checking me on that. Spoke with him Monday, whenever it was, morning, I think. But he said, no, it's not there. And I'm like, okay. And I didn't take his pushback, for the sake of context, as him being defensive. And it was none of that. It was just like, you might look at that again. Like, all right, cool. Let me go back and look. Again, this is where I watched about a dozen more times, and spot on. There was no belching of flames out of the exhaust. And since most of us want to be correct, I wanted to be correct. I didn't want to be wrong. Had to raise my hand, say, I'm flat wrong. Didn't happen. Changes the perspective pretty heavily here, doesn't it? There's one spot where Josef lifts. This is where things start to set up the domino effect. And if you care about this stuff, I'll share it. And if you don't, I'll try and get through it as quickly as I can. There's one point where you can see Josef lifts. You can hear it. You can see it. It's back around the corner, and the only thing I could use as a benchmark that I thought would be pretty easy to follow is looking from that overhead camera pointed to the rear, used in the replays from Josef's car, a little bit, I think, past halfway through the turn 3 and 4 corners, advertising billboards on the outside of the track. Right around the Domino's Pizza billboard. Again, if you want to go back, pull it up and watch. There's a Domino's Pizza billboard. If you're watching from that camera angle, it'll be on your left. Followed by one for Bommarito Automotive Group. So I don't know what the exact distance is. 150 feet, 200 feet, something like that. Well before the actual restart and restart pileup takes place. You can hear a slight dip in the throttle. Was that Josef lifting off the throttle? Was that him keeping his foot on the throttle and hitting the brake to slow down, right? I can't tell you what caused the engine RPMs to dip, but you hear it and you see the evidence of it by the closing up of his teammate Scott McLaughlin directly behind him. And again, I'm having to estimate looking from the back of the car. There's a big rear wing there with lots of elements on it. So McLaughlin is, I don't know, half a car length, 3/4 of a car length behind him when they get to that kind of Domino's Pizza billboard. This is in the general zone where some restarts, or the general area where some restarts had happened prior in the race. But again, we know Josef's waiting a lot longer to round the corner and get onto the front straight to do that. But at that Domino's billboard, however it happens, him lifting, him getting into the brake, engine note comes down for, I don't know, is it a second? Is it less? It's a brief period, super brief. But in that instant, the gap between McLaughlin's nose and Josef's attenuator more or less is gone. Car slowed briefly, boom, gap gone. And it wasn't like in a 0.01 second erasure, but it was pretty quick where you go, hey, either Josef went backwards, came back to McLaughlin for that gap to disappear. McLaughlin maybe picked up the throttle a little bit. I don't recall seeing Scott's in-car during the replays. So there is a question mark here. Was it a race strictly due to Josef coming back? Was Scotty starting to pick up the throttle a little bit, thinking, hey, this is about where restarts have happened. This must be what's going on. And they kind of met that way? Was it 50? I don't know. But I do know, if you go back, there was a more than adequate distance between the back of Josef's car and the front of Scotty's car till they got to that Domino's billboard. Right after that, that gap more or less erases, and all of a sudden we have an accordion effect behind them of folks packing up saying, oh, we must be going green imminently. I don't want there to be any extra yardage I have to make up. Let me get on the attenuator of the car in front of me. And so that happens, but Josef still isn't going. And then you see McLaughlin, and again, I'm not sure if this is Scott going forward or Josef coming back. Just that split second before Josef is getting ready to go and IndyCar turns on the green light and the green flag waves before Josef's hit the throttle hard, McLaughlin nudges the back of Josef's car, tags the attenuator with his nose. Josef, feeling the back of his car wiggle, lifts for a second to kind of assess and get the rear settled. Green light is now on. Off he goes. McLaughlin, having nudged Josef's car, unsettled his, does the same thing. Pauses for a second, makes sure everything is settled, then takes off. It's behind them where Power hit Herta and slowed. Rossi, same thing, except for he kept accelerating. And boom, we have the launch. Connor Daly has nowhere to go. He gets involved in this, although he's able to continue, but he has to come to a stop. Behind all of them, Nolan Siegel tags Jack Harvey, effectively ruins Jack Harvey's day. Jack's out, crashes. Nolan's able to continue, but it's in that closing of that gap where we've created no safety margin, no wiggle room, nose to tail, nose to tail, nose to tail, so that any little thing that might happen from that point on, and it did end up happening in that nose to attenuator contact between Newgarden and McLaughlin, that then sets off lift. Rossi's going hard. Again, not like he had enough time to do much, but Rossi was deep in the throttle when those in front of him weren't, and we had the big crash that followed. So going a little bit sooner, yes, please. Maintaining more than a millimeter gap between the nose and an attenuator, please do that, because without those decent enough gaps, there's just no reaction space or time to help oneself from being part of a crash. Francois Thivierge, I think I mispronounced that, Thivierge, says, well, that's really sweet. Says, hope cancer will leave your house like it left mine lately. Thank you, Francois. It says, first-time question to the Q&A show. As we saw the best short oval race in years, but it got destroyed by race control. They got 3 bad calls in the last 30 laps. It says, 1, Power, no penalty call. Second was Josef. his restart wasn't penalized. And third, the Herta blocking penalty would have been a good call if Linus had not passed. Really sweet. Other notes here from Francois. He's a long-time IndyCar fan, watching since the days of Jacques Villeneuve. What I don't know, if that is the uncle, or is that Big Jacques, brother of Gilles, or Jacques, son of Gilles, but writes in from Quebec. So thank you, Francois. I have learned race control put the blame without penalty because obviously he crashed, but I've been told race control felt Malukas was at fault for the crash between himself and Power, even though Power feels he was at fault and apologized to David twice in a span of 2 days for it. So if the guy who caused the crash says he's at fault, I'm going to go with the guy who caused the crash. I'll just also say, when I was told today, won't say who because it wasn't on the record, but I'll just say they absolutely knew what happened. When I was told that race control believed David Malukas was at fault, and I do not question the person who told me this, it made me, I said to them, we need to make a complete change of race control if that's the case. Anybody who thinks it was his fault in a position of authority to make judgment, say you're at fault, you're not at fault. This to me, although Will Power didn't see it at the time while he's in the middle of a race and looking forward and yada, 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 upon watching the replay once, it was evident to him that he caused it. Like, truly, I am concerned that there's at least one person, if not more, in race control who are capable of looking at that and blaming Malukas. Because if you can do that, whoa, just wow. Already spoken about the Newgarden restart. IndyCar reviewed his data after the race, did not find that he did anything incorrectly with throttle or brake checking or otherwise. So I have had so many people in the paddock tell me that Newgarden's at fault, bad guy, bad actor, this, that, and the other. I watched and replayed like you wouldn't believe. I can't find it. So I know the broadcast and the comments, right? Colton Herta's in-car radio was played. Rob Edwards' comments were played. Will Power obviously was incensed at the time. I realized that it was presented like some sort of holy violation by Josef. Tell you exactly what I think, and if I agreed, I'd tell you 1,000%. I didn't see any of those things. I think race control got this right with Josef. The Herta blocking penalty, I was told, happened too late for them to do the proper black flag routine, which could have lost him even more time. Was told that since it happened so late, there weren't a ton of laps left, and it was indeed assessed as a post-race penalty. It's moved to the back of the lead lap, so ended up not being much of a penalty. I know that there's a desire for that to have been applied while the race was still live and with a black flag, and I'm guessing a trip down pit lane, something along those lines. Probably would have lost a lap, lost a few more positions. But yeah, again, those laps go by in a flash. It's restarted with, 8 laps left. I think I'd give race control a pass on the Herta side. Power, no penalty call. Yeah, that one blows my mind. And Josef, I think that you got that one right, Francois, but I hope you'll keep sending in questions. Rounding towards the finish line of the show. Says Lance Snyder, numerous calls from race control this weekend are being called into question. Is it time for the series after every event to put out race control investigation results to give better insights on why specific calls were made? I feel like this would help everyone from drivers to fans. Been wondering about that myself, Lance. I can only say this anecdotally because I have not gone back and tried to apply some sort of race-by-race accounting in recent years, but this has felt like a year of frequent lowlights for decisions being made in race control. I think of the NBA's, they call it the last 2 minutes report, and the referees go through the last 2 minutes of the game, review any penalties they called, and with hindsight and obviously not having to make on-the-spot decisions, review their calls and speak honestly about whether they got them right, got them wrong. Game's over. Can't change it, but at least they tell us, hey, called a traveling foul on so-and-so. They didn't travel. Our bad. Or, hey, we got everything right. Whatever it is. I don't know what the equivalent is in IndyCar. I don't know if we limit it to a specific time frame or if we just look at the, hey, you assessed these penalties. How did you arrive at those decisions? I don't think that would be asking too much, but it is a really sensitive topic. Because effectively you're saying, okay, Judge, I see your ruling, but now explain to us. What's your thought process? What's your reasoning for getting here? Now, again, I realize that proper judges doing such things in real courts of law tend to write very long dissertations about how they ended up at their whatever it is. In sports, not held to that highest standard. Judges, again, call them referees, call them race control, stewards, marshal, whatever. They're judges. It's a little bit more on the fly. We're not citing precedent from so-and-so versus so-and-so in 1973, and this is how this was. It's style-based on whomever the race director might be or their race stewards happen to be. Could be arguments, right? Hey, 2 out of the 3 believe this. Those 2 might be totally wrong, but they win the argument. Therefore, the decision is made in whatever direction. There just isn't much that I'm aware of in motor racing where those who are judging are put in a position to have to answer. I think that's something we need to consider here. So I don't disagree, Lance. Been thinking about the same thing. There have been enough type decisions this year in particular where, man, I'd love to understand. I'd love to get some deeper insights on the times that I've asked to speak with race director, whomever. Those have often been shot down. Often along the lines of not wanting to make race director feel like they have to answer to idiots like me or whomever else. They'll often speak with team owners or drivers, but we are now taking time to tell you how we chose and the justification for those decisions. I would love to see that. I don't know if there's a comfort there in asking stewards to do that, possibly out of fear that there is a bit of we're not on camera, right? There's no court TV showing the judge and every word they say, every thought expressed is shared with the world. There is the doors aren't really locked, but doors locked. There's no cameras, there's no radios, there's no insight from the outside world into what goes on in IndyCar's race control, IMSA's race control, NASCAR's race control. I don't know if I recall F1 having anything. I know sometimes it hasn't been uncommon, at least at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, for the WC's race control to be shown. Maybe for some other races as well, but that's a bubble that I'd love to see pierced. I think if IndyCar wants to continue with who they have in race control, that might go a long way to either settling some fears or confirming, maybe a changeover in some of those top positions. Might not be the worst idea. I run from problems says, are you aware of anyone else who echoes Brian Herta's statement of, quote, there's a growing feeling in the paddock that it isn't a fair playing field. Goes on to say, I run from problems. Goes on to say, I don't doubt his statement as it is increasingly feeling like race control turns a blind eye in critical moments, but I'd just like to know who all he's talking about. Oh yeah. The amount of folks, largely those in charge of teams, and there's a lot of folks who run teams, meaning it's not just one person, but Brian saying this out loud, he is not stretching the truth. The amount of folks who reached out and shared same exact thoughts. Hey, of course the Penske driver gets a pass. No, I'm just repeating myself, but having spent a long time to look, I believe that Penske driver who won the race was treated accurately by race control. There's still many who believe they did not rule correctly, or by doing nothing, I should say, an absence of ruling was incorrect and that a penalty should have been applied. There is no question that as long as Roger Penske owns this series, / his family, Penske Entertainment, own the series, and they compete in the series, and any decisions are made, any rulings are made that involve success for the team, right? Hey, Newgarden's leading. We think he should receive a penalty for doing bad things on a restart. They didn't give him a penalty. Bias. That is absolute bias. This is, of course, swallowing the whistle because it's the boss's team, the owner's driver. I don't know how that ever goes away as long as series is owned by Penske, team is entered by Penske, and Penske happens to have one of the top two teams in the series. If they were a midfield team, we wouldn't be talking about this, because what kind of ruling? Hey, all right, they are biased, and they did swallow the whistle, and it helped name the driver, Penske driver, to finish 9th instead of 10th. Like, okay, but nobody's going to lose their mind over 9th to 10th. The point I raised to the series in that Monday call, and also mentioned to Tim Cindric in our Monday call, was this. Where folks are going to see problems, currently see problems after Gateway, is the decisions made when a Penske driver is in a high-quality position. First, second, third. It's always going to be open and ready for allegations of improprieties and bias. Of course, answer to both was sure, but won the race at St. Pete and finished second and were disqualified. So, yep, got that. Totally hear that. Month and a half later, was it? However long, right? Not in the moment. I'm talking about in the moment. If there is a hot take to make, there is a undeniable belief within the paddock that If it involves a Penske driver being up front, it is going to be a favorable decision or a non-decision, which can be just as favorable as a favorable decision. It's a hard thing to overcome. And so I think what we saw at Gateway was, indeed, the guy did nothing wrong. But because of who he drives for and who owns the series and the lack of penalty from the series, those things just add up to bias, impropriety, playing field is not level. I'm sure I am going to have plenty of folks when I see them Friday in the paddock from teams call me a even bigger idiot than they normally do because I am not, in this instance, agreeing with them and do not see any impropriety by the series, by race control, etc. But no doubt what Brian Hurta said is 1,000% accurate. I just don't know how that changes. I mean, granted, I did suggest to the series, like, the only way I think you might lighten things up on this is if you penalize a Penske driver while they're running up front just for the sake of it. Like, the concerns about, is there a favorable bias for them? Well, do something unfavorable. Maybe that would lead folks to go, oh, okay, so I guess they aren't biased. But that would be wrong. Just as doing something to help them would be wrong, doing something to hurt them just for the sake of letting folks know you're willing to do it, even if they did nothing wrong. I believe this is a catch-22. Dearest, I run from problems. We are going to... What are we going to do? Jonas Magnuson, you got a question I don't know the answer to, so I'm going to skip that. I apologize. Let's dive into a couple questions to close the show here. Lynn, formerly the Spurs fan, says, I'm trying to figure out how many near misses Alex Palou had in that race. Alex is a guy who I am absolutely convinced eats 3 boxes of Lucky Charms each morning, because not only are they magically delicious, but clearly that child is infused with all the luck in the world. His cartoon anvil avoidance radar is phenomenal. Realize he's had a motor blow here or there when it really wasn't helpful, and had some other things that he didn't avoid crash-wise. But for the most part, yeah, this is the luckiest human being. I need some of whatever he has. Final question is actually 2, going to put together. Craig Yirish, how you doing? Could be Yirish. I could be murdering your last name. So hope you had a good time in Monterey. Who doesn't? Asks, why did Malukas choose Foyt when, as you said, would have benefited from the technical alliance between Meyershank and Chip Ganassi? Says also, who's paying his salary? I thought Foyt needed big money for that seat. And Malukas' dad said he's not paying for his son's ride anymore. And our friend Garen Porter says, I was always under the impression Miles Rowe was in line for not only one of the Foyt rides, but a possible replacement for Will Power. Though I don't want Will to ever retire. Says, with Malukas signing with Foyt, does that change that narrative? Or is there a possibility Foyt goes to 3 cars next year? All right. May mention some of this in last week's show. I don't know. I don't remember. Let's dive into this to close. If anything, I probably should have done this at the start of the show. But hey, what I expect to see in the next couple years is this. And there's a direct linkage, as I understand it, as I am told, between Miles Rowe, David Malukas, Will Power going on here. I haven't had anyone refute this. That may happen, but so far I haven't had anybody push back on this. But here's the theory I've heard, and it sure seems to make sense to me. I'm going to pursue some more harder confirmation if I can even get it. I believe David Malukas is signed to Team Penske. I believe David Malukas is going to be effectively a 1-year, air quote, rental at Foyt. The plan as it was described a year or 2 ago through Penske's Race for Equality and Change program was the desire to help Miles Rowe, best black race car driver we've had, certainly an open wheel, in generations. On the way, get to IndyCar. Did super well in USF 2000, won the Indy Pro 2000 title last year, moved to Indy NXT this season. The hope was, this was told to me, hopefully things go super well for him there. 1 year, one and done in NXT, and then on to IndyCar. It's not the way it always happens, though. Miles, a phenomenally talented driver, hasn't taken to NXT in the way that was hoped, right? Kyle Kirkwood, for example, first year, boom, champ, on to IndyCar, run through some others in the past. There's a hope that would happen for Miles. Hasn't happened. He's going to need another year. Well, in that technical alliance that was forged last year between Team Penske and AJ Foyt Racing, I think broke the story about that on Racer. In that conversation, there were quotes, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly what they were, but Team Penske president Tim Cindric said, happy to help them. Team's really important. AJ Foyt, Roger Penske, as old a friends as you could get. Foyt team's been on hard times. We're happy to try and help, raise their boats. We also have some wants and needs. One of them is we've got Miles Rowe. We've also got some crew and mechanics and engineers that, we'd like to help raise up and being able to send them to the Foyt team, right? Those who aren't in IndyCar, you would think, are not quite there yet, but could be moved over to train on the Foyt side before coming back and going on to the Penske IndyCar side. Got that, but again, we got Miles, who we're trying to get to the Indianapolis 500, get to IndyCar, and we want to know that, we don't have any seats here, and that really isn't Penske's approach, taking rookies at all. Want to know that we have a place for him whenever that time happens to come. That was the hope for 2025. Has not come to pass. Miles will need at least another year, so we're looking at 2026. So I understand, I think I've reported this, I think others might have reported this. Will Power's contract with the team believed to go through 2025. One more year. Situation where car earmarked for Miles won't be used. Will, one more year in his current contract, will he look to try and stay and extend? I don't know. Does the team want him to stay and extend? I don't know. Idea here is, okay, this Malukas kid is tested for them before. They have a pretty high opinion of. He's available. I know in speaking with Larry Foyt, 10, 15 minutes, I think, Thursday morning, said the deal with David was done, same day it was announced, the actual, final paperwork, that kind of stuff. Wasn't really opening there to inquire about who his contract was actually with, Penske or Foyt. But just have heard that we should not be surprised if we see sponsors that are familiar to us from Team Penske cars on the Foyt car that Malukas will drive next year. Will that happen? Again, I don't know. Not something folks like to talk about, but I'll keep trying to get somebody to confirm if there is something to confirm. As I understand it, the Malukas going to the 14 car and then the team trying to find a driver with a lot of money or a big sponsor to cover off the budget for the other car. As I understand it, that is not what they're looking to do next year. And I think what we're going to see is a Ferrucci-Malukas pairing. Feels like, from everything I've seen and understand, this would be that 1 year rental with Malukas at Foyt while there's that vacancy, with the Penske team taking care of that car and its budgetary needs, owing to the fact, as mentioned, Henry Malukas is not footing the bill anymore, and the Foyt team certainly does not have the funding to pay for all that. I'm sure they can raise some funding, but this is a big power move to make if you don't have anything up front knowing, okay, I've got $8 to $10 million sitting in the bank to pay for that second car. So knowing all this, take the Miles Rowe needs another year. Car earmarked for him that won't be used. Really phenomenal young talent. End of this year will be his third season. End of next year will be 4 seasons in. Josef, when he moved from Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing / Ed Carpenter Racing to Penske, what was that? 5 years of experience. The seasoning was right for him to move to Penske. Theory David would be at year 4, would also spend that 4th year in the Penske system through that Penske alliance, technical alliance, debriefing, right? This sure feels like Team Penske is lining up its future with one of its greatest drivers, 42 years old now, I think Will happens to be, probably whatever, 43-ish next year. This is exactly what this looks like, sounds like, and how it has been told to me, that this is not AJ Foyt Racing pulling off a masterful signing to get David Malukas and then hoping they can go out and find the money to run him, but indeed part of a bigger plan involving Foyt's technical alliance partners at Penske, who have a plan and are wanting to start executing that plan. All right. Thanks to everybody who sent in their questions, to Jerry for putting them together, for our friends at Pfaff Technologies, the Justice Brothers in TorontoMotorsports.com, and I'll speak to y'all after Portland.